start here. Now, this is a really basic point, but I think it's always worth emphasizing that whether you're going to publish closed access or open access, peer review is essential. The publisher should make their peer review processes clear on their website, but if not, then very soon after you start corresponding with them, ask about what these are. For example, for open book publishers, we will review the proposal, and then if we're interested in publishing the book, we will ask for the full manuscript to review. Other publishers might review the proposal and perhaps a couple of chapters, but in any case, there should be a thorough review process in place by more than one reviewer to establish the quality of the manuscript and to make sure you know that your book will be published with a good set of other books as well. But specifically for open access, there are two key areas that I'm going to focus on just in these 5 minutes. The first is funding models for open access. They can be complicated. And the second is licensing and copyright, which is also worth some careful thought. So you may or may not know about this taxonomy of open. For some reason, we use a mix of precious metals and colours to describe different types of open access. But for a gold open access book, that means that the publisher has made the book open access, but they may, and they often do, require a fee to be paid. And the fees can vary enormously. So they can vary from as low as £5,000, which is not particularly low in objective terms, but for this kind of thing it is. And they can rise from there to £20,000 or even more for a single book. And so I suggest if you're considering a publisher where you're asked to pay a fee, try and seek some transparency about what that fee covers. You may not get very much transparency in return. Very often you might get some broad categories of things that the fee will cover, but it will not be, I expect, itemised in any specific way. And it does tend to be as well that the more well-established, prestigious, well-known publishers will often charge the higher fees. So it can be a bit of a trade-off if you're thinking about which publisher you want to go for. Do you have the funding to cover a high fee if the publisher that you want to publish with is demanding one? But then there's another way of publishing open access, which is known as Diamond. And in a Diamond model, there is no fee for authors. Open Book Publishers, as I already mentioned, has a model like this. And we're a scholar-led press. The presses that publish via Diamond models often are either scholar-led or university-led presses. And it may be that they're only Diamond for their own academics, if you see what I mean, their own researchers. So, for example, I think UCL Press is an example of this, where their own authors, they will publish without a fee. And if you're not from UCL, then they may still publish your work, but they might ask for a fee. There are different ways that the presses cover their costs if they're not asking authors for a fee, but I won't go into that now. The main thing to know is that the author isn't charged. And so I think if you're considering a Diamond press, they may well, as I say, be a scholar-led or smaller institutional press. So don't discount them on that basis. We sort of suggest to authors, if they are concerned about the prestige element, that a publisher like Open Book Publishers might not be as well known in their field, then you can always contextualize why you chose that press with, say, a line in your CV, or explain it verbally in an interview. You know, you chose that press because you wanted this, that, and the other for your work. You wanted to make it open. You may not have had access to a fee, or you may not have wanted to pay a fee. And the outcomes were this, this, and this. So what were the download figures, for example, or you particularly wanted your work to be read in X country where it would be less likely to be sold, but it would be accessed online. Then green open access is where the manuscript, not the book, is made available in a repository. So the publisher, under green, the publisher is not making your work open access, but your author's accepted manuscript is deposited in a repository to be accessed openly. The publisher may still want a fee for this because they see it as you're making another version of the book available openly. And they may also request an embargo to be applied. So this is a delay between the book being published and your open access version being made available. And it's also worth considering, is this the right fit for your book? So I've edited manuscripts where they're extremely tightly written, they're very clean. There's not a huge amount of production support in terms of large numbers of images or other kinds of support. So for those kinds of books, a manuscript in a repository actually might be a decent experience for a reader to get a good idea of what the book is like. But for many other projects, there's a huge amount of editorial intervention required, or there's a lot of production support, many, many images, which may not be able to be included in a green version. So for those sorts of projects, a green version would be very much a substandard version of the book. And finally, think about embargoes. If you're publishing under a policy, so for example, a funder policy or an institutional policy, they may often have stipulations such as there should be no embargo for the open access version coming out, or the embargo should be limited to a certain number of months. So if your publisher will not meet those conditions, then you need to consider whether they're the right fit. And just to touch briefly on licensing and copyright, when you're agreeing with a publisher to publish your book, understand what you're signing. Don't just think, oh, well, they are the experts, they know what they're doing, I'll sign this piece of paper. You might well keep the copyright, this is pretty typical, but what license are you granting to the publisher to publish your work? So for example, at Open Book Publishers, we will ask for a non-exclusive license to publish the book in the formats that we publish, which are hardback, paperback, and then several e-editions. And because it's non-exclusive, it means that you have the right to take that work elsewhere. If you want to republish any part of it, you don't have to ask us for permission. But other publishers might ask you for different levels of control over your work. So it's important to understand what are you giving them the rights to do after your work's published. And then the other kind of license to consider is an open license. So any open access book will have an open license applied. We, like many publishers, use Creative Commons licenses. I think they're probably the most widely used set of open licenses. So understand, is your publisher recommending a license? If so, what does that license enable the reader to do without asking permission? Or are you choosing one, in which case, what are you going to choose? So I'll just run through a couple. CC-BY is the most liberal license. This enables the reader to do pretty much anything with your book as long as they credit the original version. CC-BY-NC is a modification of CC-BY, and all the other licenses essentially are modifications of CC-BY. So NC is non-commercial. So that tells the reader, you can do whatever you like with my book as long as you cite me and as long as the use is not commercial. If it is commercial, you have to ask me or the publisher, depending on who has the rights, to decide whether or not you can use my book in that commercial way that you want to use it. And they can be combined as well in different ways. So those are the key points to be aware of